Hey, 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 this is Seagrove, and today I'm joined by my good friend and testing partner, Chris Diller. Chris has been working on this crazy Wobbuffet deck for quite some time and had some recent success with it. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the deck.
All right, my name is Chris Dad Diller. I used to run a YouTube channel, but I haven't been very active on it. But I know there's several people that still know me as Dad. Um, I've been playing since Phantom Forces, and haven't gone to a lot of regionals, but have been really successful at League Cups, and so I've won one with this Wobbuffet deck, and I guess we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Have you only been to one regional? Is that right?
I've actually, yeah, only been to one regional last
Okay.
year at Philadelphia. But we met at South Carolina States, what, a couple years ago,
Yep,
and I topped eight there.
that's right.
So,
And I actually had been watching your videos before that, which was kind of funny. But anyway, so this is your creation that you've been working on for quite some time. And
yeah.
then obviously we saw something similar have success in Europe with the Wobbuffet break, but we'll talk about that later. How did you decide on the concept for this list, like the Quad Wobb with the other text? Like, what made you think of the deck, and what made you decide it was a good option?
All right, that's actually a very good question. So I got really um, tired of losing games to the coin flip. There's a lot of, I mean, a lot of good players um, can play decks, and I can play most of the decks, but just being so far behind when you lose a coin flip and your opponent gets a turn one Bridget, and then you have to like lay for in, and then not only do you not get a Bridget down, but then you're giving them more cards. I just got tired of that scenario happening. It happened over and over again. So I was looking for some kind of deck that didn't worry too much about whether it went first or second. And so that's what led me to Quad Wob in general. Specifically, though, I started out just memeing with it at a league challenge,
Okay.
and and I was just going to troll a few people, and I ended up going like 3-1, and I lost to, ironically, Talonflame Break Delphox. And it was then I was like, let me go a little bit further with this. And then I went to two charity tournaments, and I played it in a standard charity tournament, and I won with it. And then then there was an expanded charity tournament, and there was someone that wanted to play but didn't have a deck. So I let them use my Seismitoad Garbodor deck, and I was like, well, what can I play? So I just pulled out Wob. I took out a couple cards, put BS Seekers in, and put a Life Dew in, and I played it in an expanded tournament, and I won. And I was like, hmm, there's something to this deck.
Yeah.
So I then went further and refined the list and to where it is now.
Okay. And you won this cup, right, recently?
Yes, I won the Asheville Cup on last Saturday.
Okay. What were some of your tougher matchups there?
So, the well, Gardevoir is kind of tough still. Not necessarily Gardevoir, but if they get a Gallade out, it can one shot everything in my deck,
Hmm.
um, and it's hard for me to. I mean, I can deny the energy, but all they need is a DCE attachment.
Right.
So Gardevoir is a tough matchup. Volcanion can be difficult, but with counter catchers, unless they just play it perfectly, it's usually very winnable also.
Okay.
And then Greninja is difficult because they put the energy back into their hand, which is why I play three Team Skull Grunts in the deck.
There you go. So you mentioned, well, I'll come back to that. So let's talk about then the matchups that what were the meta matchups that were easier wins for you?
So the one matchup that I really love about this deck, and it's getting a lot of hype right now, is Tapu Bulu, Vikavolt.
Okay.
And you know, I've at 3 league cups I've played this year. I've lost in top 8 or top 4 to Bulu. And I said, I'm tired of losing to Bulu. I'm going to play a deck. I don't care if it loses to anything else, but I'm not going to lose to Bulu anymore. And so Wob is that deck.
Okay. And the energy recyclers don't matter?
The energy recyclers don't matter. Matter of fact, in the finals of the cup, I played Bulu, and they had 2 energy recyclers and a super rod, and I still won it. So
why are you able to win that?
Well, the thing is Wobbuffet and Hoopa both kind of have 2 different roles in that matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And so Wobbuffet's going to shut off Vikavolts. And the idea is if they ever do get a Bulu fully powered up, because maybe they put them on the bench and you're not team flare grunting them. When they do finally bring them up and take out that first knockout, then you just counter catcher the Vikavolt back up. Most of them aren't playing switching cards other than Guzma. And once you run them out of Guzmas, you just keep counter catching back the Vikavolt. And if they do try to attach energy to the Vikavolt, then you just team flare grunt it off.
Okay. So what about Zoroark matchups? How are those?
Oh, Zoroark is another matchup that's really, really easy, unless there is a tech, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that the Zoroark Lycanroc player can play. But in general, Zoroark plays anywhere from, I don't know, 7 to maybe 10 energies. Most of them are special energy. And so like if a Lycanroc gets powered up, it's not very hard to usually hit Enhanced Hammer, Team Flare Grunt. And now that Lycanroc is just stranded in the active. And if they try to ever put energy on it, you just knock it off again. The biggest thing is I'm playing 3 Enhanced Hammers.
Okay.
And so it's usually pretty easy because they may play 2 fighting energy, and those can be knocked off with Team Flare Grunt or Plumeria really easy. However, and I'll kind of reveal a secret, in round, I don't know if are you going to want to talk about my individual rounds?
I want to hear the highlights from the tournament. So if there's a round that was just like just played out whatever, then you could skip. If it was like yes, I'm going to want to.
Okay. Well,
Sure.
I'll talk about the tech when we get to the rounds then.
Okay. So let's go ahead and go into that. What'd you play against round 1?
Okay, round 1 I played a Zoroark Decidueye Hoopa. It was kind of interesting. He played a Hoopa in there. Unfortunately, Zoroark Decidueye is the auto win for me because Wob shuts off Decidueye. Parallel City keeps Zoroark from one-shotting me and just knock off energy. And the guy was what's that?
They only play 6 energy.
Well, this guy was playing like 7 dark energies and 4 DCs and a special charge and a super rod. But he was a very new player. Okay. And he still, it was about like 3/4 through the way through the match. He goes, "You're not playing any energy in your deck, are you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not."
Okay. What'd you play round 2?
So round 2, I played a very intriguing deck, one that I'm actually want to toy with a little bit. It was an Espeon GX with Zoroark instead of, like Lycanroc or Decidueye. Fortunately, though, I started Hoopa, and he only had, the only 2 attackers he had that could hurt Hoopa was Tapu Koko and Baby Zoroark. And so when I saw I didn't bench anything. Okay. And there was one time, like, I was knocking energy off, but he was getting it back, and he was, he had, I think, special charge, and he had 4 puzzles a time, so he was getting his DCEs back, and he was eventually doing 20, and then there was one time where he was 20 away from taking out the Hoopa, and I just scouted for a max potion, and you could just see his face drop after that.
Alas.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that was 2. And round 3, what'd you play?
Okay, so round 3, I actually got really, really lucky. I was playing Gardevoir Gallade, Sylveon. He was playing 2 Gallades, and I had a terrible start, so I wasn't even able to knock energy off. I was trying to get counter catchering up the Sylveon, and then so that he would have to attach energy and then retreat. And I try to, but the bottom line is it got down to where he had 2 prizes left. And I had a Wobbuffet. That's it. That's all I had left. And I had Xurkitree in my hand, which in this matchup, I generally don't bench because they can just easily Secret Spring to Gallade and then attach another fairy, and then Xurkitree's dead.
Mm-hmm.
But he had 2 prizes left. Wobbuffet was in the active. I played Xurkitree down. The one thing I noticed, though, is he was so focused. He played the match perfectly, actually, but he was so tunnel visioned on taking the knockouts that he kept playing supporter after supporter to use Gallade's sensitive blade to get the buff on Gallade.
Mm-hmm.
And he sycamored and took a knockout on the Wobbuffet. But when he sycamored, he didn't realize he drew his last card. And what's the saying you say? If you misplay, you deserve the loss, right?
Yep, that's right.
He misplayed. He drew his last card. And I promoted the Xurkitree and drew, and I passed. And I said, good game. And he came back and he said, I thought this was Hearthstone. And I'm like, what? Because, Hearthstone, if you run out of cards, you don't lose, you just take damage. But
Okay.
I'm like, yeah, this isn't Hearthstone.
So he just think he had like 8 cards left and he had 7 or something like that?
Yeah, he didn't count. He was so tunnel vision that he just sycamored it and drew his last 7. And
yep. If you make one misplay, you deserve to lose.
Yeah.
All right, so then what's your 4th round?
So 4th round was a Zoroark Lycanroc. This was a guy I had been meeting in several cups. His name's Edwin. He's a Hispanic player, and he's up-and-coming player. I just really love him, love his attitude. I met him in Hickory, and he was playing Metagross, and I top cut with Gliscod Garb, but lost in top 8. But that same tournament, he top 2'd with Metagross. I saw him again at Statesville just a couple weeks ago, and he was playing right next to me, and I was playing Quad Wobb in Statesville also. And he's like, after the match, he came up to me, he said, what is that shenanigans you're playing? And I was like, it's Quad Wobb. And so at the beginning of Asheville, he comes up to me, he says, are you playing that shenanigans that you were playing the other day? And at the time, I actually hadn't pulled the trigger on Quad Wobb. I was actually deciding between Buzzwole Lycanroc or Quad Wobb, and there was a slight chance I could play Sylveon, but then when I saw all the Bulu and all the Zoroark, I was like, Quad Wobb is going to just farm all of this. So I just went with Quad Wobb, and so we ended up meeting in round 4.
Okay.
And I was hoping we could ID, but he was actually 2-1, I was 3-0, and so I got down paired. And he says, you playing that shenanigans? And I said, yeah, I'm playing it. And he said, well, I got you beat, man. I said, what do you mean you got me beat? He said, I teched for you.
That's awesome.
So he went first. Bridgeted got Rockruff, and Zorua. I think he started Lele. And then turn 2, he Ultra Balls and he pulls out the Lycanroc, the baby Lycanroc, the Midnight form, the one that does 30, but if it's a basic, does 30 more. So he was doing 60. So Hoopas are one shot, and he was hitting strong energy after strong energy. My Wobbuffets were only taking we're taking 80, and I started with double Acerola and no energy denial. So I was like Acerola. And then the Wob would take another hit, Acerola, and then I had hit Lucamine, so I'd have to Lucamine for 2 Acerolas. Eventually, I was able to Sycamore into some enhanced hammers and a Team Flare Grunt. I was able to start knocking the energy off.
Mm-hmm.
But by then he had already taken several prizes. So there's a point where I was like, is he even playing any basic energy? Because I hadn't seen any at all. So I pulled up circuitry, put it in the active, and for probably about 5 or 6 turns, I was just going for the mill because I wouldn't knock any more energy off. It was all strong energy or double colorless. Well, about 2. So then he sycamores with like 3 cards left in deck. And he attaches a strong energy to the baby Lycanroc, and there was already a strong energy on it, and he retreats it into the Tapu Lele that has a float stone. And so I counter catcher up his Zoroark, thinking, okay, if he does have fighting energy, it'll take 2 attachments to the Zoroark before he can attack.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't doing my math very well, and he top decked his second float stone, attached to the Zoroark, attached the fighting energy to that baby Lycanroc, and put a choice band. And 60 plus 30 is 9 times 2 is 180, and he knocked out the circuitry. And I was a little salty, but I did give him credit because he played the right tech for the match.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So then, was that it? Was it just 4 rounds?
No, there was actually 5 rounds.
Okay, what was the 5th round?
Okay, so we have several people at 3-1. The Guardy player I played is at 3-1. Edwin's at 3-1. Caleb Rice is at 3-1. Zachary Duncan's at 3-1. And then we have a guy who's at 4-0. And he can't even ID in because he gets down paired in round 5. So everybody's having to play to make it in. Fortunately, Edwin ended up playing the Volcanion, the guy that's 4-0. And the Volcanion guy won. He was actually ended up being the first seed. So I was like, Edwin's not in there. I got really lucky.
Sorry, not sorry.
What's that?
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I got really lucky, and I had to play the senior that was 4-0. And I will say he was a very good player. It was just unfortunate he was playing Galissapod Garb, and he had 4 rainbows and 4 DCE and 3 grass, and that's not too hard. But I want to give one quick highlight about that match. So there was one point where I didn't have any energy denial in my hand, and he had a Lele on the bench, and he had, for 3 turns in a row, attached DCE. So he had 3 DCEs on the Lele. He Guzman'd up my Wobbuffet and took it out. And then the turn before that, though, I sycamored into a team Flare Grunt and a double Puzzle of Time. And I already had an Enhanced Hammer in the discard pile. So he's got 3 DCEs on the Lele, and he's got 1 rainbow on his Trashalanche Garb.
Mm-hmm.
And I top deck Enhanced Hammer. So I literally go Enhanced Hammer, double Puzzle Time for Enhanced Hammer and Enhanced Hammer. I Team Flare Grunted, and then I Enhanced Hammered the last 2 energies. So he had 4 energies on board, and I knocked them all off in 1 turn.
Was he salty?
No, that's what I really loved about the guy. It was like a learning process for him. For a senior, he was very mature, very great attitude.
Awesome.
I don't remember his name, but after the match was over, he asked me for my list. And up until this time, I hadn't given my list out to many people because even though it's got a pretty basic skeleton to most Quad Wobbs decks, there's several different things that I play.
Mm-hmm.
But because he had such a great attitude, I was like, here you go. He's like, I'm going to go try this on some of my friends. And I was like, well, you may not have any more friends after that.
Basically.
Yeah.
So then you're in, was it top 8?
Top 4.
Top
yeah, we
4.
only had top
They went straight to top 4. That's interesting.
Yeah, so we have 5 rounds, but because we only had 9, so we were above 16 players, which required 5 rounds. But because we only had 19 masters, we had only a cut to top 4.
Okay. So then, what was top 4 matchup?
top 4 matchup was I ended up coming in as the 4 seed, and so I had to play the guy that was undefeated. He was playing Volcanion Turtonator Ho-Oh
Mm-hmm.
Kiawe. And
That sounds problematic.
yeah, well, and I was talking to a friend of mine before the match. I'm like, how do I win this? Because it's winnable for Wob, but I had not practiced the match very much. And I'm like, how do I win this? Well, games 1 and 3 were very similar in nature. He started Turtonator, and then he got some baby Volcanions powered up, and he was using what's baby Volcanions'
Power
first
heater?
attack? Power heater, yeah, to put all the energy back on. I'm still trying to knock it off because the idea is you want to try to get one of their Pokemon with very little energy on it, and then later in the game you can counter catch it up and just keep the energy off. So what ended up happening is I did that with the Turtonator. Unfortunately, he can GX the energy back on, so that game actually went a little bit longer than normal. But he made a mistake of putting a Fighting Fury belt on the Turtonator, and late in the game he tried to attach a Float Stone, and I said, you can't, you got the Fighting Fury belt. And he said, oh, I apologize. But it was at that point where I realized that, he was, all 4 of his Guzmas were gone. There was, every time he tried to attach an energy, I was just going to knock it off. And so at that point, he realized that was it. And he said, let's go to game 2. Game 2 was totally opposite of that. Game 2, he started Ho-Oh, and in turn 1 Kiawe, 4 energies on the Ho-Oh, and I'm stuck there with a Wobbuffet. I was forced to bench Xurkitree, which you don't want to bench in this matchup, but I was forced to. And then the very next turn, he Guzma field blowered the Fighting Fury belt off of Xurkitree and took a KO on the Xurkitree. And I'm like, okay. And I ended up drawing into 3 Team Flare Grunts and a Plumeria, but I had no way to get more resources. I didn't have a Skyla for a Sycamore or an N. So I was able to knock an energy off, but he would just attach another one. They're playing 14 energies in the deck. Yeah. So he would attach another one. Then he'd do 50 to me, and I'd knock another one off. And I think I top deck another Wobbuffet, and then he'd do 180. Then I'd knock another energy off. He'd attach another one, do 180, and just in a matter of 3 or 4 turns, he had the game.
Okay.
Game 3 went very similar to game 1, except this time he started putting a lot of power heater ring a lot of energy onto his Turtonator. So I was able to do the same idea in the first game, but with just a baby Volcanion. And he ended up prizing his Float Stone and his Field Blower, which were both very important to him. And I just ended up once his Guzma, what ends up happening is you counter catcher something that doesn't have a lot of energy, bring it up, they Guzma, you counter catcher again, they Guzma, and then when you run them out, then you double puzzle a time for more counter catchers. And when they finally run out of Guzmas and switching ways, then you've got them, because then anytime they try to attach energy, you just knock it off. And that was actually a surprise to both him and me. I was not expecting to win that match, but I kind of learned it on the fly and pulled that one off.
Cool. So then the finals.
So the finals was against Zachary Duncan with the Meta Podcast, and he was playing Bulu, Vikabulu.
Okay.
And when I played that, actually the game 1 I lost because I started Hoopa, and I had a dead hand, and he got turn 2 Vikavolt and strong charged, and I was able to deny a little bit of energy, but strong charge is 2 to my 1, and eventually, even without attachments from hand, he caught up and just knocked out the Hoopa, and I never had but the thing about mill decks is if you lose, it's good to lose
early.
Those 3-minute games,
Yeah.
The second game and the third game were very similar. Once they run out of Guzma, you just counter catcher up a Vikavolt, and you play Wob so they can't strong charge, and you eventually just start milling. The only thing is that the game was going so long. I won with only about 45 seconds left.
Oh wow.
And if time had been called, we'd have had 3 turns. But because he had more prizes, he would have won if we'd have run out of turns. But
Yeah.
fortunately, I started playing real fast. That actually makes me want to bring up a point. You did a video on etiquette a couple weeks back, and I've never really been one to tell, like, count to 15 in my head and then say, I need an action. But in this, when you're playing a deck like this, you've got to be willing to do that, even if it's makes you uncomfortable to say, hey, I need an action. Because I did have a couple players when they played me, they were trying to stall out. And it's amazing if you just say the phrase, hey, I need an action, please. Most of the time, you don't have to say it again because they know, then they realize, hey, this guy's counting. He knows that I'm taking too much time.
Yeah. That's a good point. So you win. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few strange things in the list. You want to real quick run through any of those choices?
Sure. I guess probably the strangest thing in the list is that I play actually 3 sycamores in the deck. If you look at most Wobbuffet decks, they don't play any sycamore. It's usually 4 in and 3 Skyla. And what I found with that is what made the deck problematic with that is that you don't keep up resources with your opponent. They're like Zoroark is, if you have a Hoopa in the active, they're going to be trading like crazy to get what they need to beat you. So they're going to be flying through their deck. But if you don't have a way to draw through your deck quickly, you either come to a point where you don't have energy denial, or you don't have a way to start milling. And so I came to a realization when I was playing in those charity tournaments that if I could just keep up with, as they're milling themselves, if I can keep up with them, then I'll have enough resources to finish them off at the end game.
Yeah.
And so Sycamore doesn't sound right because it gets rid of resources. But there are some times where you can be too greedy as a Wobbuffet player and hold too many resources, and you need to go ahead and Sycamore and get to the resources that you actually need. Okay. I'll give you an example. I'm holding a Team Rocket's Handiwork in my hand and a Sycamore, and I want to like play the Team Rocket's Handiwork because I might mill something good, right? But usually in the early game, it's better just go ahead and Sycamore. You'll get the Team Rockets later with the Lusamine. But if you play greedy as a Wob player, then that can actually lose you the game. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I play is 4 Skyla. That's probably not earth-shattering, but Skyla is the Wobbuffet's Tapu Lele. Right? Most people think you grab Skyla to grab E-Hammer or a Puzzle of Time or a Counter Catcher or a Nest Ball, and you use it to get those things. But more than half the time, I use Skyla to grab the supporter that I need. Many times it's a Lusamine or a Sycamore. Sometimes it's Team Flare Grunt. It's just whatever I need in the moment, and that also comes to the point where, as a Wobbuffet player, you got to be thinking a couple turns ahead. What am I going to need for next turn? And that's so Skyla. Even it's like your Tapu Lele, but you don't get to use it this turn. You use it for next turn.
Okay.
The other thing is, the other cheeky thing is, don't play any Guzma in the list. I play 4 Counter Catchers, which are my gust effects. And then I play 1 Escape Rope, and the Escape Rope is only in there if I need to get Hoopa or Xurkitree out of the active and get a Wobbuffet into the active.
Okay.
It doesn't come into play often, but it does come every now and then. It's necessary.
Okay. Last question. So we've seen these European lists with Wob Break. Would you
Okay.
consider their decks are a bit different? I think they're actually attacking with some counter energies and stuff from time to time.
Mhm.
But would you consider a Wob break in your version?
That's a great question. Um, I don't think Wob Break is a bad thing. I don't think they're attacking with Wob Break because right back at you, just you have to discard the counter energy. So I think they're using Wob Break mostly as a buff.
As a HP buff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, I like I can see on one hand I can see why Wobbuffet Break is good because
Can be
it
blowered.
Wob can't get knocked out by Galissapod or Zoroark or those kind of things. But I like Fighting Fury Belt because I can Skyla for a Fighting Fury Belt. Now they can feel blower. I understand that. Um, but I can also play Fighting Fury Belt on Hoopa and on Xurkitree.
Mhm.
And having a 220 HP Xurkitree is, sometimes Xurkitree just becomes a tank for you. And if you know they've already gone through, most people are playing 2 field blowers. So if they've gone through both of their field blowers, Xurkitree can kind of be a quasi wishy-washy.
Yeah.
As far as the counter energy, they're using that on mainly Mewtwo and Mew.
Yeah.
I even used to play one lightning in there for Xurkitree's GX attack, but it became a win more card.
Okay.
So I didn't really, I just cut all the energy out. Could counter energy be useful? Maybe, but I don't think I would ever play it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your list and your insights on the list and for your time. Do you have any shout outs or anything you would like to give?
Probably just shout out to my wife. She's an amazing woman who's really helped me in testing, but also just, helped me with the family and things like that. Pokemon, I guess you could say. So I'd like to shout out to her and to my two boys that I love dearly. But that's all the shout outs I have.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.